Hello, dear listener. Welcome back to another evening together. I'm so glad you're here. If you're new to this corner of YouTube, welcome. Pour yourself some tea, find your most comfortable spot, and let the world outside fade away for a while. This is your time, a moment of peace in our endlessly turning world. Tonight I have something special for you, a story that's been waiting to be told, one of mystery and the sea, of duty that transcends death itself, and of one man's unwavering commitment to a promise made long ago. This is the tale of Thomas Ashford, the keeper of Meridian Light, and the night everything changed on that lonely rock in the Atlantic. It's a story that asks us what we would sacrifice for others, and whether some responsibilities are truly eternal. Before we begin, if you enjoy these atmospheric tales and you'd like to support this channel, please take just a moment to subscribe and click the bell icon. It helps more than you know, and it ensures you'll never miss a story. And if you're already part of our community, welcome back, my friend. Your presence here means everything. Now then, let the outside world fall away. Close your eyes if you wish. Let my voice carry you to a place where the waves crash eternal against ancient rocks, where fog rolls thick and mysterious across cold waters, and where a single light stands vigil against the darkness. Our story begins on a November evening in 1889, when the wind howled like a living thing and the sea was restless with secrets. The island had no name on any map that mattered. Sailors called it Meridian Rock, though whether this was because of its position or simply because a meridian had to be called something, Thomas Ashford never knew. What he did know was that he had kept the light burning here for 23 years, through storms that could strip paint from stone and calms so profound the sea looked like hammered silver. 23 years. He was 32 when he'd first rowed out to this lonely posting, a young man running from grief. Now his hair was iron gray, his hands were gnarled as driftwood, and he knew every crack in every stone of the lighthouse tower as intimately as a man knows the lines of his own face. The lighthouse itself rose 140 feet from the highest point of the island, which wasn't saying much, as the island was barely 3 acres of granite and tough grass that smelled of salt and seabird droppings. The tower was painted in spiraling stripes of white and red, though the paint was always peeling, always in need of maintenance. The light at the top was a marvel of French engineering, a Fresnel lens that could cast its beam 18 miles out to sea on a clear night. Thomas lived alone. This was not unusual for lighthouse keepers of remote stations, though most had families on the mainland they visited during relief periods. Thomas had no one. His wife Eleanor had died of consumption 3 months before he'd taken this posting, and they'd had no children. His parents were long gone, his brother killed in a mill accident. The lighthouse had become his entire world, and he'd grown to prefer it that way. His daily routine was as regular as the tides. Rise at dawn, trim the wicks, clean the lens, check the fuel levels. Breakfast of porridge and black tea. Morning maintenance. There was always maintenance. The salt air corroded everything. Afternoon weather observations, recorded in a leather-bound log that was almost full after more than 2 decades. Evening meal of whatever he'd managed to catch or the supplies from the monthly boat. Light the lamp at sunset, tend it through the night, ensure it never faltered, never dimmed, never went dark. The supply boat came once a month, weather permitting. Sometimes weather didn't permit,
and Thomas would go 6, 7, 8 weeks with nothing but his own company and the seabirds. He didn't mind. He learned to talk to himself without feeling foolish about it, and sometimes he still talked to Eleanor as if she were sitting across from him at the small wooden table in the keeper's quarters.
"Going to be a rough one tonight," he said aloud on that November evening, addressing the empty chair as he prepared his supper. "Barometer's been dropping all day. Winds shifted to the northeast. We'll see 30-foot swells before midnight, mark my words." The wind answered him, moaning through the iron galleries that circled the tower at various heights. Thomas had long since stopped finding the sound eerie. It was simply the voice of his home, singing its endless song. He ate his meal, salt cod and potatoes, the same as most nights, and climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room as the sun began its descent. The stairs were iron, worn smooth by his boots over thousands of ascents. 173 steps. He'd counted them so many times he no longer needed to. The lantern room was his favorite place in all the world, glass on all sides, giving him a panoramic view of the sea. To the west, the sun was setting in a glory of orange and purple, the clouds lit from beneath like coals in a dying fire. To the east, darkness was already rising from the horizon like a curtain being drawn, and all around, the Atlantic Ocean stretched to infinity, its surface beginning to roughen as the promised storm approached. Thomas lit the lamp with practiced efficiency, first the pilot light, then adjusting the fuel flow until the mantle blazed brilliant white. The Fresnel lens caught the light and amplified it, sending it spinning out into the gathering darkness. Flash, dark, flash, dark, flash, dark. The signature pattern of meridian light, 3 flashes every 15 seconds. Ships knew it. Navigators charted by it. In his small way, Thomas was part of something larger than himself. He settled into the keeper's chair, a worn leather seat that had molded itself to his form over the years, and opened his log. November 14th, 1889, he wrote in his careful hand. Barometer 29.2 and falling. Wind NE at 25 knots, gusting higher. Seas rough and building. Visibility good but deteriorating. Lamp lit at 5:47 p.m. All in order. He closed the book and looked out at the darkening sea, and that's when he saw them. Lights. Not the lights of ships, he knew those well enough. These were different. They flickered and danced on the horizon, pale green and strangely luminous, like foxfire or marsh gas. There were dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, spread across the eastern horizon in a line that seemed to stretch for miles. Thomas stood and moved to the glass, pressing his face close. The lights wavered and pulsed, appearing and disappearing, never staying in one place for more than a moment. They looked almost organic, like a school of glowing fish had somehow risen to the surface of the sea. He'd heard of such things. St. Elmo's fire, some called it. Phosphorescence in the water. Natural phenomena that sailors had been reporting for centuries. But he'd never seen it himself, not in 23 years of watching these waters. The lights continued their strange dance for nearly an hour while Thomas watched transfixed. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they vanished. One moment the horizon was alive with ghostly green illumination, and the next there was only darkness and the growing storm. Thomas returned to his chair, unsettled in a way he couldn't name. He told himself it was nothing, just one of the ocean's many mysteries, but something in his chest felt tight, and his hands, which never trembled, were shaking slightly as he reached for his pipe.
The storm hit just after midnight, as he'd predicted. The wind rose to a shriek, and rain lashed the lantern room glass so hard Thomas feared it might shatter. The lighthouse swayed. It was built to sway, to flex with the wind rather than resist it. but the motion was more pronounced than usual. The lens continued its rotation, the light continued its faithful pattern, and Thomas remained at his post, as he always did during storms. It was at the height of the tempest, when the wind was howling like all the damned souls in perdition, that he heard it. A bell. Ship's bell, ringing frantically in distress. Thomas was at the glass in an instant, straining his eyes against the darkness and the driving rain. There, yes, there, a light that wasn't his own. A ship's lantern, swinging wildly. It was close, dangerously close to the rocks on the north side of the island. Without thinking, Thomas grabbed his oil lantern and his oilskin coat and plunged down the stairs. He knew every inch of this island in the dark, knew where every stone lay, where the paths were safe, and where one wrong step would send a man plummeting into the surf. He ran toward the north shore, his lantern swinging, already shouting, though he knew his voice would be lost in the wind. When he reached the rocks, he held his lantern high and peered into the maelstrom. The ship was there, a two-masted schooner, no more than 100 yards offshore. It was being driven toward the rocks by wind and current, and there was nothing that could save it. Even as Thomas watched in horror, the vessel struck with a sound like the crack of doom. The main mast snapped and went over the side, taking rigging and sail with it. "Hold on!" Thomas screamed, knowing it was useless. "Hold on! I'm here!" He could see figures on the deck now, crew members clinging to whatever they could grasp. The ship struck again and again, each impact driving it further onto the rocks, breaking it apart piece by piece. The hull was breaching, water pouring in. Thomas did the only thing he could. He secured his lantern to a rock outcropping and began pulling off his boots, his coat. If anyone made it into the water, if anyone managed to swim, he would be ready. The water would be cold enough to kill in minutes, but minutes were better than seconds. He watched the ship die. There was no other word for it. The schooner was torn to pieces by the rocks and the sea, and in less than 10 minutes it was gone, vanished beneath the waves as if it had never been. Thomas stood in the freezing rain, salt spray and tears mingling on his face, and saw no survivors. No one calling for help, no one struggling in the surf. Nothing. When he finally climbed back to the lighthouse, soaked and shaking with cold and shock, he immediately climbed to the lantern room. The light was still burning, still flashing its pattern. He'd kept the light, he'd done his duty, but it hadn't been enough. In the log, his hand shaking so badly he could barely form the letters, he wrote, "Schooner wrecked on North Rocks, approximately 2:30 a.m. No survivors observed. God rest their souls."
He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the keeper's chair and watched the light turn, and wondered how many men he'd just watched die. Wondered if there was anything at all he could have done differently. When dawn came, gray and cheerless, he descended to the north shore again. The storm had passed, leaving the sea exhausted and sullen. Thomas searched the rocks and the tide pools for any sign of the wrecked ship, any debris, any bodies to pull from the water and give proper burial. He found nothing. Not a plank, not a rope, not a single piece of evidence that a ship had died there in the night. The rocks were bare and clean, washed by the retreating tide. Thomas stood there for a long time, staring at the place where the schooner had broken apart. Had he dreamed it? Had the isolation finally driven him mad? No, he'd written it in the log. He'd seen it with his own eyes. But where was the wreckage? The supply boat arrived 5 days later, piloted by Captain Henshaw, a gruff man in his 60s who'd been making the run to Meridian Rock longer than Thomas had been keeping the light. "Hard enough, hit it you?"
Henshaw asked as they unloaded crates of provisions onto the small dock. Hard enough, Thomas replied. Henshaw, did you hear anything about a schooner going missing? Two-master, dark hull? Henshaw paused, a crate of tinned goods balanced on his shoulder. Schooner? No. Why? Thomas told him about the wreck, about the ship he'd seen torn apart on the rocks. Henshaw listened with a deepening frown. Thomas, he said slowly when the keeper had finished, there's been no report of any missing vessel, no ship overdue, no crew unaccounted for. And if a schooner went down in these waters, believe me, I'd have heard. But I saw it, Thomas insisted. I saw it with my own eyes. I heard the bell. Henshaw set down his crate and clapped a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Been out here a long time, haven't you? 20 years? 23. 23 years. That's a long time alone, Tom. A long time with nothing but the sea and your own thoughts. Maybe you saw something, but maybe it wasn't quite what you think you saw. The mind can play tricks in a storm. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to drag Henshaw to the North Shore and show him the spot, make him understand. But what would he be showing him? Empty rocks? Clean stone? He had no evidence, nothing but his own memory and an entry in a log that suddenly seemed like the ravings of a madman. Maybe, he said quietly, maybe you're right. But he knew what he'd seen. After Henshaw left, Thomas fell into a dark mood. He performed his duties mechanically, without the satisfaction he'd once taken in them. He began to dread the coming of night, when he would have to climb to the lantern room and face the darkness he'd once found comforting. 3 weeks passed. The weather turned colder, the days shorter. Thomas found himself talking to Eleanor more frequently, carrying on long conversations with her memory. He asked her if he was going mad, if isolation had finally broken something in his mind. She never answered, of course, but sometimes he could almost feel her presence, warm and reassuring. Then, on a moonless night in early December, the lights returned. Thomas saw them from the lantern room just after lighting the lamp. The same pale green luminescence dancing and flickering on the eastern horizon. His heart began to pound. He stood at the glass, hands pressed against it, watching. The lights moved closer this time. They seemed to be approaching the island, drifting in from the deep water like a procession. As they drew nearer, Thomas could see there were patterns to them, almost like formations. They swept across the water in long lines, converged into clusters, spread apart again. And then, rising from the center of the lights, he saw a ship. It materialized like something from a dream, pale and ghostly but undeniably real. A 3-masted bark, square-rigged, flying what appeared to be no flag at all. The sails glowed with the same green phosphorescence as the lights in the water, as if the canvas itself was woven from foxfire. Thomas grabbed his telescope with shaking hands and trained it on the vessel. Through the lens, he could make out details, the rigging, the deck, the figurehead, a woman with her arms outstretched, and crew. There were crew moving about the deck, but they moved strangely, their motions jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by an uncertain hand. The ship sailed past the island, making no deviation in its course, no acknowledgement of the lighthouse or its keeper. It simply moved through the water, silent as a dream, surrounded by its corona of eerie light. Thomas watched it until it disappeared beyond the western horizon, and the dancing lights faded with it. He stood in the lantern room until dawn, waiting to see if it would return. It didn't. Over the following weeks, he saw them 3 more times, always on moonless nights, always the same green lights, always ships emerging from them, but never the same ship twice. He saw a sloop with its sails in tatters. He saw a massive clipper ship, 4-masted and majestic even in its ghostly state. He saw what looked like a Spanish galleon, ancient beyond reckoning. And each time he saw crew moving on the decks, crew that shouldn't be there, crew that couldn't be there. Thomas stopped writing these sightings in his official log. He knew how they would sound. Instead, he started a separate journal, hidden away in his personal quarters, where he recorded everything he witnessed in meticulous detail. The dates, the times, the types of vessels, the directions they sailed. Patterns began to emerge. The ships always approached from the east and sailed west. They always appeared when there was no moon, and they were always surrounded by those green lights, which he had come to think of not as phosphorescence, but something else, something that made his skin crawl and his breath come short.
He began to research in the small library he kept in his quarters. Books on maritime history, sailors' legends, accounts of strange phenomena at sea. He read about ghost ships and phantom vessels, about the Flying Dutchman and the Kelouch. He read about St. Elmo's fire and ball lightning, about bioluminescent algae and marsh gas. None of it quite fit what he was seeing. In late December, a winter gale kept the supply boat from making its run. Thomas's provisions ran low, and he was reduced to rationing his food, eating once a day to make his stores last. He grew thin, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. He slept poorly, plagued by dreams of drowning men and ships torn apart on rocks. It was during this period, weak from hunger and lack of sleep, that Thomas first heard the voices. He was in the lantern room, tending the lamp, when he heard someone call his name. The voice was faint, almost lost in the wind, but distinct. He went to the glass and looked down at the island. No one was there. The docks were empty, the paths deserted. "Thomas." There it was again. He spun around, but the lantern room was empty save for himself and the turning lens. "Thomas Ashford." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was male, rough with the accent of the sea. Thomas felt ice forming in his veins. "Who's there?" he called out, hating the tremor in his voice. "Show yourself!" No answer, just the wind and the turning of the lens and his own rapid breathing. He told himself it was hunger, exhaustion, the mind playing tricks just as Henshaw had said. But that night, when he tried to sleep, he heard them again. Multiple voices this time, whispering in the darkness of his quarters. He couldn't make out words, just a susurrus of sound like waves on a distant shore. When the supply boat finally arrived in early January, Captain Henshaw took one look at Thomas and insisted he return to the mainland. "You need a break, Tom," Henshaw said firmly. "Your skin and bones. When's the last time you slept?" "I'm fine," Thomas protested. "The light needs tending." "The light will be fine. I'll bring out young Morrison to watch it for a week. You need proper food, proper rest, and maybe a visit to the doctor." "I can't leave," Thomas said, and realized he meant it absolutely. The thought of leaving the lighthouse, of abandoning his post, filled him with a dread he couldn't explain. "Something's happening here, Henshaw. Something important. I need to be here." Henshaw studied him with concern. "What kind of something?" Thomas almost told him,
almost explained about the ghost ships and the green lights and the voices in the dark. But he saw the worry in Henshaw's eyes and knew how it would sound. They'd declare him unfit for duty. They'd remove him from his post. And for some reason he couldn't articulate, Thomas knew that would be catastrophic. "Nothing," he said. "Just the usual, storms and seabirds. I'm fine, truly. Just got a bit low on rations this month. I'll be more careful with portions." Henshaw didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. He left extra supplies and made Thomas promise he'd eat properly. Thomas promised and meant it, though he knew the food wasn't really the problem. That night, after the supply boat had gone, Thomas lit the lamp as usual and settled into his chair. The sun set, darkness rose, and right on schedule, the green lights appeared. But this time, something was different. This time, the lights didn't just pass by. They surrounded the island, forming a perfect circle around Meridian Rock. Dozens of them, hundreds, pulsing and flickering in unison. And in that circle of light, ships began to appear.
One by one at first, then in groups, they materialized from the darkness. Schooners and sloops, brigs and barks, clippers and galleons. Ships from different eras, different nations, different fates. All of them glowing with that pale green luminescence, all of them silent and ghostly. Thomas stood at the glass, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it over the wind. The ships formed their own circle, matching the lights in the water, and they all faced inward toward the lighthouse, toward him. And then they stopped moving. They simply hung there on the water, motionless despite the current and the wind, dozens of ghost ships in a ring around his tiny island. Thomas could see the crew now, standing at the rails of their vessels, all facing the lighthouse. Men in sailor's garb from across the centuries, rough wool and leather from the 1600s, the blue jackets of naval officers from more recent times, all of them looking at him with eyes that glowed the same green as their ships. One of them raised a hand, pointing directly at the lantern room, at Thomas. Thomas staggered back from the glass, his breath coming in gasps. This was madness. This was impossible. But it was happening, and some part of him, some deep instinct, knew that these were the dead come calling. A voice spoke, and this time it wasn't faint or distant. It filled the lantern room, resonant and commanding. "Thomas Ashford, keeper of the light, we have been waiting for you to see us, waiting for you to understand." "What are you?" Thomas managed to choke out. "What do you want?" "We are the lost, those who died in these waters, those who succumbed to storm and rock, to cold water and cruel fate. We are Legion, Keeper, and we need your help." Part 3. The Crossing. Thomas didn't sleep that night. How could he? The ghost ships remained in their circle around the island until just before dawn, when they faded like mist at sunrise. But even after they vanished, Thomas could feel their presence. The air felt thick with it, charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. He descended from the lantern room on trembling legs and tried to make sense of what he'd witnessed. Every rational part of his mind insisted it was impossible. Hallucination, madness, the final collapse of a mind worn down by too many years of isolation. But he knew what he'd seen, knew it as surely as he knew his own name. The dead were here, and they wanted something from him.
He tried to go about his usual routine, but his hands shook so badly he dropped tools, spilled water, knocked over his coffee cup. He gave up on normalcy and instead sat at his small table, staring at the wall, trying to understand.
The voice had said they needed his help. But help with what? What could the dead possibly need from a lighthouse keeper? As the day wore on and exhaustion crept through his bones, Thomas found his fear gradually being replaced by something else, curiosity. And beneath that, a strange sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. Since Eleanor's death, he'd been going through the motions of life, keeping the light because it was all he had left to do. But this was something different, something that mattered in a way he couldn't yet define. When night fell again, he lit the lamp with steady hands. He'd made a decision. If the ghost ships returned, he wouldn't cower. He would listen. He would try to understand. The ships appeared just after full darkness, materializing with the green lights as they had before. Thomas stood at the glass and waited. The voice came again, the same resonant tone that seemed to fill the air itself. "You do not run. You do not hide. That is good, keeper. We chose well." "Chose?" Thomas asked. "Chose me for what?" "To be our light, our guide across the threshold. You have kept the flame burning for more than 2 decades, never failing, never faltering. Your devotion has not gone unnoticed. We have been watching you, Thomas Ashford, as you have finally learned to watch for us." Thomas moved closer to the glass. "I don't understand. Guide you where? Your ships. You don't need a lighthouse." "We are not ships," the voice replied, and there was something like sadness in it. "We are the souls of those who perished in these waters, trapped in the vessels that became our tombs. We cannot rest, cannot move on. The waters here are cursed, keeper. They hold us fast. We have been trying to cross for decades, some of us for centuries, but we cannot find our way." "Cross to where?" "To what lies beyond, to the far shore, to rest." The voice paused. "Your light calls to us. It is a beacon not just for the living, but for the dead. We see it even from the depths where we lie, but it is not enough. We need more than light. We need a keeper who understands, who can see us, who can help us find our way." Thomas felt something click into place in his mind. All those years of tending the light, of keeping it burning through every storm, every dark night. He'd thought it was for the living, for the ships that sailed these waters. But what if that had only been part of it? What if there had always been another purpose, one he was only now beginning to understand? "How can I help?" he asked. "The curse that binds us is old," the voice said. "It was laid down by blood and malice, by a death so terrible it poisoned these waters. The lighthouse was built on this spot for a reason, though those who commissioned it did not know the true purpose. It was always meant to be more than a navigational aid. It was meant to be a doorway." "A doorway?" Thomas repeated. "Between this world and the next, beneath this world and the next. But the doorway has never been properly opened. For that, it requires a keeper who can walk between worlds, one who has already begun the journey himself." A chill ran through Thomas that had nothing to do with the cold wind. "What do you mean?" "Thomas Ashford, keeper of meridian light. Do you not know? Have you not guessed?" The voice was gentle now, almost pitying. "You died 3 months ago." The world seemed to tilt beneath Thomas's feet. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not. I'm here. I'm alive. I tend the light every night. I eat. I sleep. You went into the water during the storm. The night of November 14th. You saw the schooner wrecked on the rocks, and you went into the water trying to save them. But the cold took you, Keeper. The sea claimed you, as it has claimed so many others. Your body lies on the north shore even now, caught in a tide pool, staring up at the sky." "No," Thomas said again, but even as he denied it, memories were surfacing. The icy shock of the water, the current pulling at him, the feeling of his limbs going numb, his lungs filling, the darkness closing in. And then he'd been back in the lighthouse, dripping wet, climbing the stairs to check the light. He'd thought he'd made it back, thought he'd survived, but had he? Thomas sank into his chair, his mind reeling. If he was dead, why was he still here? Why could he still see the lighthouse, touch it, maintain it? "You're bound to your duty, Keeper, just as we are bound to these waters. You kept the light so faithfully in life that your spirit could not leave it, even in death. You continue your rounds because it's all you know, all you are. But there is more for you now, Keeper. You can be more." "More," Thomas echoed numbly. "You can help us cross, and in doing so, perhaps you can free yourself as well. The living can tend a light, but only one who walks between worlds can open the door. Will you help us, Thomas Ashford? Will you complete your true purpose?" Thomas sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything. Part of him still insisted this was madness, that he was alive and none of this was real. But a deeper part, a part that perhaps been trying to tell him the truth for months, knew the voice spoke truly. He was dead. He was a ghost tending a lighthouse that no longer needed him, and these lost souls, hundreds of them, were asking for his aid. "What do I need to do?" he asked quietly.
"The curse that binds us must be broken, and for that you must find the one who laid it, the drowned man. He lies in the deepest place, in the darkness where no light has ever reached. You must go down to him and make him release his hold on these waters." "Go down? Into the water?" "You need not fear it now, Keeper. The sea cannot harm what is already lost. You will descend to the depths, find the drowned man in his abyss, and convince him to let us pass. He has been alone for so long, consumed by his hatred and his pain. Perhaps it is time someone reminded him of mercy." Thomas stood slowly. Outside the glass, the circle of ghost ships waited. Dozens of vessels, hundreds of souls, all watching him with those eerie green eyes, waiting for him to decide. He thought of Eleanor, wondered if she'd crossed over, if she'd found peace, wondered if he would see her again if he helped these lost souls find their way. "I'll do it," he said. "Tell me what I must do." The green lights pulsed brighter, and from the circle of ships came a sound like wind through rigging, like canvas catching breeze. It might have been voices, hundreds of them, whispering their relief and gratitude. "When the tide is lowest," the voice instructed, "go to the north shore, to the place where you died. Enter the water there. Do not fight the current. Let it pull you down, down to where the light does not reach.
You will find him there, the drowned man, still clutching his anchor, still burning with rage at those who drowned him. Speak to him, keeper. Remind him of what he's forgotten. And if you can move his heart even a fraction, the curse will break, and we will all be free. And if I fail, then you will join us in our endless circling, and we will wait for another keeper, one who might come in another lifetime, who might have the courage and compassion to try again. But we hope you will not fail, Thomas Ashford. We have seen your heart. We believe you are the one we've been waiting for. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll go at low tide tomorrow night. We will be waiting, the voice said, and the ghost ships began to fade. Keep the light burning until then, keeper, one last time. Let it shine for all of us who tried so desperately to follow it home.
I am not alone, Graves snarled. I have thousands for company. All those I've trapped here, all those who died in my cursed waters. They circle above, eternal in their torment, and I am sustained by their anguish.
Are you? Thomas asked. Are you truly sustained by it, or has it poisoned you, made you into something you never wanted to be? The drowned man started to speak, then stopped. The green light flickering from his eyes seemed to dim slightly. You were a sailor, Thomas continued. You knew what it meant to help your fellows. You knew the brotherhood of the sea. The men and women trapped above, they weren't your murderers. They're innocent souls who just want to rest. Is this really what you want? To make innocent people suffer for what was done to you?
They should suffer, Graves said,
but there was less conviction in his voice now.
The world is cruel. The sea is cruel. Why should I be the only one to bear it?
Because you're better than that, Thomas said. I can see it in you, Jonathan. Beneath all this hatred, beneath 3 centuries of rage, there's still the man who sailed under the sun, who laughed with his shipmates, who once knew kindness. That man wouldn't want this.
That man is dead, Graves whispered, but his grip on the anchor was loosening.
That man is still here, Thomas insisted. That man has been buried under all this pain, but he's not gone. I know because I was like you once. When my wife died, I wanted the world to feel my pain. I ran away to that lighthouse to hide from everything, to nurse my grief and my anger. I wasted years, Jonathan, years I could have spent honoring her memory, helping others, making something good from the tragedy. But I just sat in that lighthouse, alone with my bitterness.
Then you understand, Graves said. You know what it's like to lose everything.
I do, agreed Thomas, but I also learned something in those years, even if I learned it too late. Holding on to that pain doesn't honor the dead. It doesn't make anything better. It just keeps us trapped, both the living and the dead. He moved closer still until he was kneeling before the drowned man, meeting those burning eyes directly. Let them go, Jonathan. Let all of them go. Release your curse and let these souls find peace. And maybe, just maybe, you can find some peace yourself. The drowned man stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, tears began to flow from those green glowing eyes. They mixed with the seawater, becoming currents in the darkness.
I'm so tired, drowned man whispered, so tired of the anger, so tired of being this thing. I don't even remember what the sun looked like. I don't remember what it felt like to be warm.
You can remember, Thomas said gently. You can let it go. The anger, the curse, all of it. You can release them and release yourself.
I don't know how,
Graves said, and his voice was small now, like a lost child. "I've held on so long, I don't know how to let go." Thomas reached out and placed his hand on the anchor that Graves clutched. "Start here," he said. "Put down the weight. You don't have to carry it anymore." Graves looked down at the anchor as if seeing it for the first time. Slowly, so slowly, his arms began to loosen. The anchor which he'd clutched for more than 3 centuries began to slip from his grasp. "What if I fall apart?" Graves asked with fear in his voice. "What if there's nothing left of me when I let go?" "Then you'll be free. And maybe that's what you need, not to hold yourself together, but to finally let yourself rest." Graves's hands opened. The anchor fell, tumbling down into the deeper darkness below, carrying with it centuries of rage and pain. As it fell, the green light began to fade from Graves's eyes. His swollen form started to deflate, to shrink back to normal human proportions. The seaweed withered and fell away, and the water around them began to change. The curse was breaking. Thomas could feel it like a physical thing, a tightness in the water, suddenly releasing. The bones on the sea floor began to glow with the same green light, then dissolved into streams of luminescence that rose toward the surface. The thousands of trapped souls, freed at last. Graves was changing too. The bloated corpse was becoming something else, something lighter. His flesh became translucent, then transparent, then pure light. He looked up at Thomas with eyes that were no longer burning with rage, but shining with something like joy.
"Thank you," he said, his voice fading. "Thank you for seeing me, for remembering that I was once a man." "Go," Thomas said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Go and be at peace, Jonathan Graves. You've suffered long enough." Graves smiled, and it was the smile of the young sailor he'd once been, before betrayal and murder had twisted him into something dark. Then he dissolved into light, rising up through the water in a brilliant stream of green and gold. Thomas watched him go, and then he felt the current pulling at him, too. He was rising, being drawn up toward the surface along with thousands of other souls. The water around him was alive with light, with spirits finally freed from their long imprisonment. He rose through the darkness, and the darkness became less dark. He could see the shapes of other souls around him, men and women from across the centuries, all ascending together. Some of them reached out to touch his hand as they passed, offering silent gratitude. Others simply smiled, their faces alight with relief and joy. Thomas rose faster, the light growing stronger, and then he broke through the surface. The sea was transformed. Where once there had been only dark water, now there was a field of light. The green luminescence covered the surface as far as Thomas could see, and from that light the ghost ships were rising. But they were changing. The ghostly vessels were becoming solid, real, their timbers no longer transparent, but gleaming with fresh paint and varnish. Their sails, which had hung in spectral tatters, now billowed full and white in a wind that came from nowhere and everywhere. And the crews were whole again, no longer skeletal or decomposed, but as they had been in life. Young and old, men and women, sailors from across the ages, all of them restored. They moved about the decks with purpose now, making ready for a voyage. Thomas tread water, watching in wonder as the ships came to life around him. The schooner he'd wrecked on the rocks, the 3-masted bark, the sloop, the clipper, the ancient galleon, dozens of vessels, all preparing to sail. And then he saw it, rising from the very center of the fleet, a ship unlike any other.
It was massive, easily the largest vessel present, with 5 masts that stretched toward the sky. It glowed with a light that was no longer green, but purest gold, so bright Thomas had to shield his eyes. It was beautiful beyond words, a ship that belonged not to the ocean, but to whatever lay beyond. This was the vessel that would carry them, the ship that would take them to the far shore. A rope ladder unrolled over the side of the golden ship, dropping down to where Thomas floated. He looked up to see a figure at the rail, beckoning to him. The voice that had spoken to him in the lighthouse called out across the water, "Come, keeper, come aboard. Your task is complete, but your journey is not finished." Thomas grabbed the ladder and climbed. His ghostly form felt stronger now, more solid, as if breaking the curse had somehow made him more real. He pulled himself up and over the rail onto the deck. The ship was even more magnificent from aboard. The decks were golden wood that seemed to shine with its own internal light. The rigging was silver. The sails were woven from something that looked like starlight. And the crews were all the souls he'd helped to free, working together to prepare the vessel for departure. The figure who had beckoned him stepped forward. It was a man in a captain's uniform from the early 1800s, distinguished and kind-faced. "Thomas Ashford," he said, extending his hand. "I am Captain Marcus Whelan, formerly of the merchant brig Cassandra. I have served as spokesman for the lost souls of these waters for the past 60 years, and I, along with all those here, owe you a debt we can never repay." Thomas shook his hand, feeling the strange solidity of it. "You owe me nothing. I only did what needed to be done." "You did far more than that. You gave up your eternity to save ours. The curse held you as tightly as it held us, yet you risked your very existence to free us. That is the mark of a true keeper." Around them, the other ghost ships were beginning to sail. One by one, they turned toward the east, toward the horizon where the first hint of dawn was beginning to show. But it wasn't a normal dawn. The light that grew on the horizon was too bright, too pure. It was the light of whatever lay beyond this world.
"They're leaving," Thomas said, watching the ships sail toward that impossible light. "As must we," Whelan said. "The way is open now, thanks to you. The curse is broken. We can finally cross over to whatever waits beyond. Will you come with us, Thomas? You've more than earned your rest." Thomas looked toward the horizon, toward that beautiful, beckoning light. Part of him wanted nothing more than to sail toward it, to finally find peace, to perhaps find Eleanor waiting for him on that far shore. But something held him back. He turned and looked toward Meridian Rock, still visible in the distance. The lighthouse stood tall, its light still turning, still flashing its faithful pattern into the darkness. "The light," he said softly. "Who will tend the light?" Whelan followed his gaze. "The lighthouse will be fine, my friend. The living will send another keeper. It's not your responsibility anymore." "Isn't it?" Thomas asked. He thought of all those years, 23 in life and 3 months in death, keeping that light burning. He thought of the ships that depended on it, the sailors who navigated by it, and he thought of what might happen if the light went dark, even for a single night. More than that, he thought of other souls like these, future sailors who might die in these waters. With the curse broken, they wouldn't be trapped as these had been, but they might still need guidance. They might still need a light to show them the way. "I can't go," he said, and even as he said it, it knew it was the truth. "Not yet, maybe not ever. The light needs a keeper, and I'm still that keeper. There might be others who need help crossing. I can't abandon them." Whelan studied him for a long moment, then smiled sadly. "You're choosing to stay? To remain in this liminal state, between life and death, for the sake of a duty that's no longer yours?"
"It will always be mine," Thomas said simply. "I'm the keeper of Meridian Light. That doesn't end just because I died. Maybe it never ends." Whelan clasped his shoulder. "But know this, the choice is always yours. When you're finally ready to cross, the way will be open to you. We'll make sure of that. A ship will come for you whenever you call." "Thank you," Thomas said, "but I think I'll be staying for a while yet." The golden ship was beginning to move now, turning toward that distant light. The other ghost ships were already far ahead, sailing into the brightness. Thomas could see them starting to fade, to become one with the light itself. "Before I go," Whelan said, "there's something you should know. The curse is broken, yes, but the waters here are still special. They're thin, Thomas. The veil between worlds is thin here. That's why the lighthouse was built in this spot, why you were called to keep it. This is a crossing place, a threshold, and now that you know what you are, now that you understand your true purpose, you can do more than just guide ships. You can guide souls." "Guide them how?" "When sailors die in these waters or anywhere nearby, they'll be drawn to your light. Not trapped, not cursed, but simply drawn. And you can help them understand what's happened, help them accept it, help them find their way to ships like this one that will carry them onward. You can be a lighthouse for the dead as well as the living."
Thomas felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness. "I can do that. I want to do that." "I thought you might," Whelan said. He stepped back and saluted. "Fair winds and following seas, Keeper Ashford. May your light never falter." "And to you, Captain Whelan, to all of you." The golden ship picked up speed, its sails filling with that impossible wind. It sailed toward the light on the horizon, and Thomas stood at the rail watching until it merged with the brightness and disappeared. The last of the ghost ships faded from view. The green luminescence in the water dimmed and went out. The sea returned to its normal state, dark and rolling under the stars. Thomas found himself standing on the surface of the water, as solid as if he stood on stone. He looked toward Meridian Rock, toward his lighthouse, and he could see it clearly even from this distance. The light was still turning, still flashing. His light, his responsibility, his purpose. He began to walk across the water, and the sea held him up, carried him home. Thomas climbed the stairs to the lantern room and settled into his chair just as the true dawn began to break. The lamp was still burning, still faithfully rotating. He'd been gone all night, down to the depths and back, but the light had never faltered. He looked out at the sea, watching the sun rise over the eastern horizon. The water was calm, peaceful, giving no sign of the momentous events that had occurred beneath its surface. To any observer, it would have looked like any other morning at Meridian Rock. But Thomas knew better. He could feel the change in the air, in the water, in the very stones of the lighthouse. The curse was broken, the waters were clean, and he was no longer just a keeper of light for the living. The supply boat came later that week. Thomas watched it approach from the lantern room, saw Captain Henshaw tie up at the dock. But this time, Henshaw wasn't alone. There was a young man with him, carrying a duffel bag. Thomas descended the stairs and watched from the doorway as they walked up the path. Neither of them could see him. He understood that now. He was invisible to the living, just another ghost haunting his former post. "This is it," Henshaw was saying to the young man. "Meridian Light, most isolated posting in the service. The last keeper, Thomas Ashford, was found dead about 3 months ago. Went into the water during a storm, trying to save someone. Never made it back. We had to run a temporary keeper until we could find someone willing to take the permanent position." The young man, he couldn't have been more than 25, looked up at the lighthouse with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "And no one's kept it since?"
We've had temps rotating through, but no one's wanted to stay. Too lonely, they say, too isolated. But the light's been maintained. Strange thing is, some of the temps swear they've seen Ashford's ghost still tending the lamp. Sailors and their superstitions, eh? The young man didn't laugh. He was staring at the lighthouse with an odd expression. What was he like, Ashford? Devoted. 23 years he kept this light, never missed a night, dedicated his whole life to it. Some said he was running from something, but I always thought he'd just found his calling. Not many men know what they're meant to do with their lives. Thomas Ashford knew. Thomas climbed the stairs together and watched them go. The new keeper, his name was William Morrison, Thomas learned from listening to their conversation, seemed competent enough, young, eager, perhaps a bit frightened of the isolation to come, but willing. That was what mattered. That night, Thomas watched from the shadows as Morrison lit the lamp for the first time. The young man's hands shook slightly, but he followed the procedure correctly. The light blazed to life, the lens began its rotation, and the familiar pattern flashed out across the dark water. Thomas smiled. The light would go on. His lighthouse would be tended, and he would be here, watching, ready to help guide not just the living ships, but the souls of those who might need him. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Morrison proved to be a good keeper, conscientious and careful. Thomas watched over him like a guardian spirit, sometimes making small adjustments to the lamp when Morrison wasn't looking, sometimes leaving tools in convenient places, once even warning him away from a rotting board on the stairs by manifesting just enough to make the young man feel uneasy about that particular step.
Morrison never saw him clearly, but Thomas thought the young keeper sensed his presence. Sometimes Morrison would talk aloud as he worked, as if addressing someone unseen. "Hope I'm doing this right, Mr. Ashford," he'd say. Or, "Found your journal in the desk. You kept beautiful records." And sometimes, late at night, Thomas would find Morrison sitting in the keeper's chair, reading from Thomas's private journal, the one where he'd recorded the ghost ships before he understood what they were. "I see them too," Morrison whispered one night, staring out at the sea. "The lights, the ships. I thought I was going mad, but you saw them too. You wrote about them. What are they, Mr. Ashford? What am I seeing?" Thomas wished he could answer, could explain, but he remained silent, invisible. Some things the living had to figure out for themselves. The first soul came to the lighthouse on a winter night, 3 months after Morrison had taken up the post. Thomas felt it before he saw it, a pull, a calling, a sense that someone needed help. He went to the lantern room and looked out, and there, standing on the water, was the ghost of a sailor, young, confused, looking around in bewilderment. Thomas walked out onto the gallery that circled the lantern room. He could do that now, could appear and disappear at will, could move through solid objects or stand upon thin air. Death had its freedoms. "Hello," he called down to the ghost. "Are you lost?" The sailor looked up, relief flooding his face at being seen, being acknowledged. I don't know what happened. One moment I was on the deck of the Meridian Star, and the next the mast came down on me. And now I'm here, but I can't find my ship. I can't find anything." "You died," Thomas said gently, compassionately, the way Captain Whelan had spoken to him. "I'm sorry, but you're not lost. You're right where you need to be." He helped the sailor understand what had happened, helped him accept his death, and then, as Whelan had taught him, he called. He didn't know how he did it, but he reached out with his mind, his spirit, whatever he was now, and he called for a ship. It came from the east, a beautiful vessel with sails of light.
Not as magnificent as the golden ship that had carried away the cursed souls, but lovely nonetheless. A smaller craft, a sloop designed for 1 or 2 passengers. The sailor saw it and understood. "Is that for me?" "It is," Thomas said. "It will take you where you need to go, to rest, to peace, to whatever comes next." "Thank you," the sailor said. "Thank you for the light. I saw it when I died. It helped me find my way here." Thomas watched the sailor board the ship of light and sail away toward the eastern horizon, and he felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. Purpose. Real purpose. This was why he'd stayed. This was what he was meant to do. Over the years that followed, others came. A fisherman who'd gone overboard in a storm, a passenger from a capsized yacht, a submarine crew member who died far from home. Thomas helped them all, guided them all, called ships of light to carry them onward. And the lighthouse stood eternal, its light turning, turning, turning through the darkness.
William Morrison kept the light for 15 years before retiring to the mainland. His replacement, Sarah Chen, kept it for 23, the same as Thomas had. Then came Marcus O'Brien, then Jennifer Walsh, then others whose names Thomas learned and remembered. The lighthouse was automated eventually in the modern age, no longer requiring a resident keeper. But Thomas remained. He tended the light in his own way, making sure it never failed, never faltered. And when souls came to the waters around Meridian Rock, confused and frightened and lost, he was there to help them find their way. Decades passed, then a century, then more. The world changed around Meridian Rock. Ships became larger, more sophisticated. The ocean traffic increased, then decreased as shipping routes shifted. Technologies came and went, but the lighthouse remained, and Thomas remained with it, faithful to his duty. He never called for his own ship. Sometimes he thought about it, wondered what waited for him on that far shore, wondered if Eleanor was there, if she'd been waiting all this time. But the thought of leaving, of abandoning his post, was impossible to contemplate. There were always more souls who needed help, always more ships of light to call, always the lamp to tend, even if no living eyes could see him doing it. Sometimes, late at night, when the sea was calm and the stars were bright, Thomas would sit in the keeper's chair and talk to Eleanor. "I hope you understand," he'd say. "I hope you know why I can't come to you yet. There's still work to be done here, still souls who need guidance. Maybe someday, when the last ship has passed, when the last soul has found peace, I'll call for my own vessel. But not yet, my love, not yet." And sometimes, in the quietest moments, he thought he could feel her answer. Not words exactly, but a sense of understanding, of approval, of eternal patience. She would wait, and when his time finally came, whenever that might be, she would be there. 200 years after Thomas Ashford's death, on a calm summer evening, when the sea was like glass and the sky was scattered with stars, a young couple sailed their small yacht past Meridian Rock. The lighthouse still stood, fully automated now, its light still turning its faithful pattern. The woman looked up at it and smiled. "My great-great-grandfather kept that light," she said. "Thomas Ashford.
Family legend says he loved it so much his spirit never left. Her companion laughed. "You believe that?" "I don't know," she said, "but I like to think it's true. I like to think he's still up there somehow, still keeping watch, making sure everyone finds their way home." In the lantern room, invisible to living eyes, Thomas Ashford smiled. He stood at the glass and looked out at the yacht as it sailed past, its running lights bright in the darkness. Another vessel safely guided, another ship that would not founder on these rocks. The light turned, the lens rotated, the beam swept across the water, out to sea, calling to
William Morrison kept the light for 15 years before retiring to the mainland. His replacement, Sarah Chen, kept it for 23, the same as Thomas had. Then came Marcus O'Brien, then Jennifer Walsh, then others whose names Thomas learned and remembered. The lighthouse was automated eventually in the modern age, no longer requiring a resident keeper. But Thomas remained. He tended the light in his own way, making sure it never failed, never faltered. And when souls came to the waters around Meridian Rock, confused and frightened and lost, he was there to help them find their way. Decades passed, then a century, then more. The world changed around Meridian Rock. Ships became larger, more sophisticated. The ocean traffic increased, then decreased as shipping routes shifted. Technologies came and went, but the lighthouse remained, and Thomas remained with it, faithful to his duty. He never called for his own ship. Sometimes he thought about it, wondered what waited for him on that far shore, wondered if Eleanor was there, if she'd been waiting all this time. But the thought of leaving, of abandoning his post, was impossible to contemplate. There were always more souls who needed help, always more ships of light to call, always the lamp to tend, even if no living eyes could see him doing it. Sometimes, late at night, when the sea was calm and the stars were bright, Thomas would sit in the keeper's chair and talk to Eleanor. "I hope you understand," he'd say. "I hope you know why I can't come to you yet. There's still work to be done here, still souls who need guidance. Maybe someday, when the last ship has passed, when the last soul has found peace, I'll call for my own vessel. But not yet, my love, not yet." And sometimes, in the quietest moments, he thought he could feel her answer. Not words exactly, but a sense of understanding, of approval, of eternal patience. She would wait, and when his time finally came, whenever that might be, she would be there. 200 years after Thomas Ashford's death, on a calm summer evening, when the sea was like glass and the sky was scattered with stars, a young couple sailed their small yacht past Meridian Rock. The lighthouse still stood, fully automated now, its light still turning its faithful pattern. The woman looked up at it and smiled. "My great-great-grandfather kept that light," she said. "Thomas Ashford. Family legend says he loved it so much his spirit never left." Her companion laughed. "You believe that?" "I don't know," she said, "but I like to think it's true. I like to think he's still up there somehow, still keeping watch, making sure everyone finds their way home." In the lantern room, invisible to living eyes, Thomas Ashford smiled.
He stood at the glass and looked out at the yacht as it sailed past, its running lights bright in the darkness. Another vessel safely guided, another ship that would not founder on these rocks. The light turned, the lens rotated, the beam swept across the water, out to sea, calling to any who might need it. And Thomas Ashford, keeper of meridian light, stood his eternal watch, faithful to the end and beyond, a lighthouse for the living and the dead, a beacon in the darkness that would never, ever go out. The light was all, the light was everything, and the light would endure. And so ends our tale of Thomas Ashford, the lighthouse keeper who discovered that some duties transcend even death itself. I wonder, dear listener, what calls to you with such devotion? What purpose would you pursue beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime? Thomas found meaning not in grand gestures or dramatic heroics, but in the simple, faithful execution of his duty, night after night, year after year, age after age. There's something beautiful in that, isn't there? In the idea that dedication itself can be sacred, that small acts repeated with love and commitment can become something eternal. Perhaps we all keep our own lighthouses in our own ways. Perhaps we all have opportunities to be beacons for others, to help guide those who are lost, to offer light in darkness. We may not do it for centuries like Thomas, but we can do it today, tomorrow, for as long as we're given. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. If this story touched you, if it made you think or feel or wonder, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you'd like more tales like this one, stories of mystery, of the supernatural, of the sea and the souls who haunt it, please subscribe. Your support means the world and helps me continue bringing these stories to life.
Until next time, dear friend, may you find your purpose, whatever it may be. May you tend it faithfully, and may you always keep your light burning, no matter how dark the night may seem. Sleep well, dream well, and remember, somewhere out there, on a lonely rock in the Atlantic, a lighthouse keeper still stands watch. Good night.